I'm going overseas with Dad and Mom, so I'm leaving this behind as it's just baggage. It might be tough for you, but it'll kill time and it's just right for you. Betty, with a smug smile, says this to Susan. The biggest pride of Karen, an elite man's wife and Betty's mother, is, of course, Betty herself. On the other hand, we with Susan, who is of the same age, are from an ordinary family. Influenced by Karen, Betty grew up boasting about her financial comfort and academic excellence, emphasizing how she is different from Susan. For Susan, too, it's an important summer vacation with university entrance exams ahead. Excited Betty leaves a heap of school assignments at our house and heads off on her overseas trip. But Susan, having received such meanness, takes a certain action. My name is Margaret. I am a regular housewife in a dual-income family, with Susan who is facing exams this year. Every day I make breakfast, wake up Susan and my husband David, give them sandwiches, and we all set off. Such similar days were supposed to continue, but it changed in an instant. Now my life is filled with distress. It's because of Karen, who married Andrew, a man working in a globally expanding famous company, the so-called rich Karen and her daughter Betty. My daughters Susan and Betty are of the same age and were as close as twins when they were kids. Living not too far from each other's homes during long vacations and Christmas, they were inseparable. However, as Betty started attending various classes and tutorials, the opportunities to play decreased. We grew distant from Karen's family, and by the time we met again after a while, Betty, maintaining top grades at a prestigious private school, had become Karen's pride. With Andrew often away on overseas business trips, Karen enjoyed a luxurious housewife life. Betty, almost certain to be accepted into a designated school, signified a smooth-sailing family. But for the idle duo, the existence of Susan and I, a dual-income family with Susan studying hard for general exams, was a perfect target for mockery. When did Karen's competitive nature start twisting negatively? Her once admirable, straightforward attitude disappeared, turning into sending boastful texts. I wouldn't mind if I were the only target. But when it's a holiday, they visit, pretending it's to give us luxury suites. But I knew they came to disturb us, especially Susan. We bought cake specially. Let's have tea. Susan, come down. Betty, call her. Karen says this and, without my permission, summons Susan. Of course, Susan is in the middle of studying. Soon, a displeased Susan comes down to the living room. Betty, with a somewhat malicious smile, nudges her standing next to her. It must be hard for the exam group having to cram. But since your cousin came to visit, entertain her, won't you? Well, Betty probably doesn't need to study. In stark contrast to the provocative Betty, Susan is shy and not good at standing up for herself. All I can do is to end the tea time quickly. I quickly make tea and hasten them to eat the cake. During that time, Karen keeps bragging about how excellent Betty is, and how hard she works at her lessons. Margaret, being a mother, you never boast about Susan, do you? Suddenly, Karen blurts this out. However, I don't argue back because Susan has asked me beforehand not to respond. Susan has many virtues that neither David nor I have, so I always want to retaliate. But Susan seems to think it's unnecessary to let Karen and her daughter know. I hold back for Susan's sake and respond casually. Mom always preferred Karen over me. It's the same thing. Then Karen laughs contently, saying, That's right. Yes, our parents also preferred Betty much more than Susan, leaning towards her. They sided with Karen, who married the elite man Andrew. If it were just that, I could bear it, but they incessantly compared the grandchildren and excessively praised Betty. I was utterly fed up with such parents. Despite feeling intense irritation inside, I had no choice but to endure for Susan's sake. Eventually, the children enter their summer vacation. But at the same time, trouble also arrives. Karen's family was preparing to leave for a month-long overseas trip. We were constantly hearing about their triumphant travel plans almost every week. We thought about going on a trip too, but Susan was enthusiastic about studying quietly since Betty would be away, so we dropped the plan. However, just before their departure, Karen and her daughter show up at our house with a mountain of assignments. "Karen, what is this?" "Of course, summer vacation homework." I faced them, feeling surprised and bewildered. The heap of assignments covering the table, obviously from Betty's school. "We're leaving for the trip, right? It's just unnecessary baggage, and Betty doesn't have time to bother with such tedious stuff, so we thought of leaving it to Susan." "Yeah, it might be a bit tough for Susan, but it's good for study, right?" Stunned, Susan and I. Karen and her daughter have smug smiles on their faces. They don't even try to hide their condescending looks. But do they realize how absurd they are being? I have my own assignments, and summer courses too." There's no time to waste on frivolous things during a student's summer vacation. Susan's desired school is highly competitive, and she has no time to deal with Betty's assignments, her studies, and summer courses. Even Susan tries to retort, but Karen starts speaking as if to cut her off. "I did say let's stop Susan from spending her last high school summer studying and go out, but she doesn't seem to go anywhere, does she? Unlike my husband, Margaret, you guys can't afford a trip, can you?" Betty looks at Susan with a mean glare, as if agreeing. "My school standards are high, you know. Not sure if Susan can solve them, but it's good for studying, right?" Saying whatever they please, they leave those blank assignments and depart for their trip. Probably, Andrew was unaware of this. Andrew was already abroad for work, spending half of the children's summer vacation. Without fair and earnest Andrew, they confidently came to dump this on us. I tried discussing Karen's outrageous behavior with our parents, but they still sided with Karen's family, and my anger became uncontrollable. "If studying isn't necessary, then just do it. Betty giving you a chance makes her the better child. Susan, you're not trying hard enough. You have to take exams. Instead of being selfish, why don't you just study quietly?" My mom says this, spouting illogical justifications and evasions. Dad agrees with her, making it clear that I can't expect anything from our parents. I feel dejected and give up on consulting them. The reason Susan couldn't get a recommendation for school is her lack of assertiveness. Those chosen for recommendations were class officers, student council members, and club members with notable achievements. For the introverted Susan, it was always going to be difficult. Yet she was desperate enough to study without Karen's interference. I am filled with burning anger. Susan, too, is furious. But unlike me, who vehemently refuses to touch the assignment, she does the opposite. She starts working on Betty's assignments along with her own studies. I won't lose. I have to beat Betty to even talk about exams. Mom, I'll definitely finish this. I hadn't thought of such a response, but Susan insists. I'll create a task so well done, it'll shut them up. If the assignments remained blank when they returned, it would trouble them. But I was more concerned about how much more they would interfere with Susan afterwards. Karen and her daughter looked down on us, thinking, they can't possibly do it. Then we should surpass them with our work. Even if they ask for something next time, we can refuse, saying, we completed the massive summer vacation assignments, so we don't owe them. Inspired by Susan's positive attitude, I changed my mindset. To beat Karen and her daughter, we can't just endure it. We need to hit a grand slam. I confide everything to my husband David and persuade him to tackle this as a family. Susan and I are eager, but David says he'll think about it calmly, and that's the end of the day. But within 2 days, David comes up with a summer vacation schedule to finish the assignments. He plans not just the assignments, but also divides household chores among the three of us, schedules progress checks, and even secures time for Susan to focus on her studies. He perfectly arranges leisure time in our study-dominated life. We laugh at the unexpectedly precise and quick response plan. Is Dad actually amazing? Susan asks innocently. David smiles shyly. It's what I do every day at work. But to Susan and me, he is the best leader. Thus, our family unites and completes the assignments perfectly. Susan focuses on her studies, improving her mock exam scores. It seems to boost her confidence, which relieves me. David, checking the assignments at the end, picks one up happily. This German essay is excellent. Margaret and I could go back to university now. Actually, both David and I couldn't pursue a PhD program due to financial reasons. We were so engrossed that it reminded us of the German language seminar where we first met. Research and studying are indeed fascinating. It worries me that Betty might dismiss this fun as troublesome. Just before the summer vacation ends, Karen's family returns. They collect the assignments, barely checking the content, thinking it's enough that they were done. Their bragging stories seem more important than anything else. Then, a few days into the new term, an unusually happy Karen and her daughter visit. Apparently, some of the assignments were well received by the teachers. Karen and Betty, neither of whom did the work, are smug about it. And it's a German essay. Next week, Betty will be honored in front of everyone for an excellence award. By the way, Margaret and David graduated in German literature or something. Seems like they didn't get good jobs, though. Well, it's Betty's assignment, so she'll get all the credit anyway. Karen probably found it amusing that we were so worked up over just a child's homework. Susan couldn't hide her mocking laughter, knowing she'd get praise as an extra. Later, Karen sent a photo of Betty holding the certificate, but I just replied, "Congratulations," and deleted the picture. However, trouble arose the next month. In the middle of the night, an infuriated Karen showed up at our house, with a crying Betty by her side. "Hey, Margaret, that German thing, write it again. You did it once, so you can do it, right?" What? At this unreasonable hour, and suddenly asking for German? While I tried to calm down the crazed Karen at the front door, David and Susan woke up. Betty, honored for her summer vacation German essay, had agreed to present it at the cultural festival, thinking she only had to rate it. But she was then told to submit a new essay, not the awarded one, for another competition. Betty, struggling with even simple German compositions, thought, I can just get Susan to write it again, and didn't worry much. She contacted Susan, setting a deadline, and unfairly imposed it on her. But Susan ignored the German essay. The summer project had grown her confidence and trust in her family. Today, just before the festival, Susan replied to Betty, pressing her about the deadline in anger. I didn't write the summer essay, so I don't know. Why don't you ask Mom? Betty, always riding on her mother Karen's coattails, is inherently cowardly and mean-spirited. She's not one to confront us directly. Surprised by Susan's unusual coldness, Betty thought of consulting her mother, but unluckily, Karen had gone to a party hosted by a madame friend and returned home very late. When she came back, she found Betty crying and learned about the essay. Karen, who had no interest in the cultural festival, dismissing it as deceptive to children, was shocked. Regardless of it being midnight, she hurried to our house. So, the German thing. Write a new one, please. Susan deceived us. Poor Betty is suffering. That seemed to be the situation. Honestly, I was also surprised by Susan's boldness in leaving the explosive situation to us. Susan looked on at the wailing Karen and her daughter at the front door indifferent. Anyway, we had no reason to write another essay. I recommended admitting we can't do it, but Karen retorted, I can't let them say something so pathetic. Yet our family firmly refused. We fulfilled our obligation with the summer homework. We won't do anything more. If you don't stop, we'll call the police. Or even Karen's husband first. With David's words, Karen suddenly fell silent and left with Betty. A few hours later, our phone rang. It was our unhappy mom from home. Apparently, Karen had gone straight to our parents crying. Write Betty's essay for her, she demanded. But woken up at such an unreasonable hour, Mom was venting differently than her usual support for Karen. Really, that mother and daughter are ridiculous. Karen is always angry, and Betty is too clingy. So inconsiderate at this time of night. Mom continued to complain about Karen on the phone. While Mom might see herself as a victim, she's just looking down on her own daughter. I quickly refused the request to write the essay. We decided not to get involved with them anymore. Afterward, they somehow finished the German essay using a translation app. As expected, the quality was vastly inferior to the one from the summer vacation. The teachers were shocked by its poor quality. Suspicions arose whether the award-winning assignment itself was plagiarized, leading to an investigation of Betty. The paper you submitted for the festival was of such a low standard, it was unprecedented. We discussed it with other teachers and think we need to verify if you really wrote that summer essay yourself. I did it, teacher. I didn't plagiarize. It's true. If that's true, there's no way the paper would be this poor. Basic grammar and spelling mistakes were obvious. It looks like it was hastily written in a rush to meet the deadline. Even for a high school student. Anyway, you need to explain properly. Grilled by the teachers without her mother's protection, Betty finally confessed to having someone else do all her assignments. As a result, her grades were reassessed. Her presentation at the festival was canceled. She received a suspension and was given a load of extra assignments, exceeding those from summer. Her reputation among the teachers plummeted. The details of the assignment outsourcing spread throughout the school, seemingly resolving the issue. But the story didn't end there. Following the severe scolding she received, classmates revealed problems with her school life. Betty had been targeting poor or timid students, bribing them to do her assignments. Students who couldn't resist due to financial struggles or those ridiculed in her group came forward, escalating the problem. The school tried to resolve the matter internally. Betty underwent several interrogations and investigations. The incident led to the cancellation of her school recommendation, and the runner-up student took her place. Forced into general exams, Betty found herself unable to study at school. As the exam season approached rapidly, her lack of preparation resulted in complete failure. Meanwhile, since Karen and her daughter stopped visiting us after the festival, Susan, who diligently studied, was accepted into her desired state university. Our family celebrated joyously, and I prepared a lavish dinner. Karen, unchanged, forced Betty to retake college entrance exams, fearing they'd be seen as a family that couldn't send their child to college. Despite her pride, Betty started studying at home but was disinterested. The atmosphere in Karen's household worsened, with constant parent-child quarrels, often discussing our family. Andrew finally became suspicious of Betty's excessive animosity towards Susan. He was completely unaware of the incident at school. When he found out, he was deeply shocked. To think Betty would grow up to boast about being rich, look down on others, and exploit people for gain? Karen had unwavering, baseless confidence in her parenting. Andrew had trusted her, but it was his daughter who caused the school-wide incident. A disheartened Andrew suggested they apologize to our family, but their pride prevented them from doing so, refusing to apologize and instead trying to shift the blame onto us. They continued making excuses. Hearing the daily complaints, Andrew came to despise his wife and daughter, eventually deciding to divorce. Expelled from their lavish home, Karen and Betty decided to return to their family home. Expecting a warm welcome because of their beloved granddaughter, Karen's plans went awry. Their usually supportive parents now treated Betty, who was preparing for college entrance exams again, as if she were a bad luck charm. Furthermore, their attitude changed quickly. They had always been harsh on Susan, but now they were trying to ingratiate themselves with her, even offering expensive gifts. Both Susan and I were baffled. For your college acceptance, how about a luxury brand bag? Susan did so well, she deserves any extravagance. Yeah, unlike Betty, don't worry about the cost, ask Grandpa. Praising Susan and belittling Betty, our parents had changed their tune. Susan had long lost any affection for her grandparents, and a branded bag wouldn't change that. Neither Susan nor I wanted to retaliate against what we had endured from Karen's family. Not wanting to look down on them, we decided to decline the celebration gift, wondering why they were trying to please us. Their true intention seemed to be related to Karen's return. Karen's back, you know. We thought you could help. We're getting older and there's housework. Mom hesitated intentionally. They couldn't handle Karen and her daughter, so they wanted us to step in. But without an apology for past actions, we no longer wanted anything to do with Karen and her family. We all refused and never set foot in the family home again. There would be no more visits in the future. At our doorstep, where our parents desperately tried to appease us, Susan responded with a smile. We're moving. We won't return to this town, so take care of Betty and her issues. I have college and don't want to be disturbed anymore. Goodbye. Our parents were left speechless. Yes, we had decided to move after that summer, regardless of the exam results. Thus, we cut ties with Karen and her family and headed to a new town. Left behind, they continued to fight daily in the family home. With a divorce finalized and a lower standard of living, Karen became reclusive, unable to face her friends, and jobless. They engaged in ugly disputes, blaming each other with daily uproars involving the grandparents. In our new town, we quickly made friends. Susan diligently studied at university, immersed in her seminar research. She balanced her studies with a social life, including old and new friends. Despite a year focused on studying, Susan had grown to balance work and play. I hoped she would enjoy more outings in the future. Though moving was financially straining, we had enough savings to support Susan's chosen path. The absurdity of being burdened with summer homework would one day be a shared joke. When that day comes, we'll remember not Karen's spiteful actions, but our family's united perseverance.